risk us singing. So, but I'm happy to see the weather's changing a bit. It's pretty dreary this morning, but it looks like the sun's coming out again. We had a really nice day yesterday for at least a couple hours. I got the kids to the park. I was really actually happy about that. I played some basketball with Zach, so it's I don't know. I used to think it was really annoying that people talked about the weather all the time. Yeah, especially the Irish, always complaining about the weather. But now I understand. So now it's kind of become a part of me, and it really does matter. It really does kind of affect the mood. So I think it's time for me to get my Irish passport. That's one of my goals this year. Colin's just shaking his. Um, but yeah, on that kind of optimistic note, I wanted to talk about something that I've just been reflecting a lot about. I feel is really something I've been like praying a lot about and trying to understand more deeply and struggling with. And it's the challenge of personal responsibility, right? And I feel it's such a core element of the principle. And I'm often trying to think, religion is a very personal thing, or faith is a very personal thing, right? And I'm always thinking, what is it that is unique or special about the principle or about our faith, right? And I think one of those core elements is the way the principle tries to explain personal responsibility, right? And in a way, it's sacred in God's plan and in God's providence. That personal responsibility is what makes people different, what makes them unique, what makes them children of God, right? Because without personal responsibility, then we're either animals or robots, right? Animals in that there's no control, you just do whatever you're supposed to do in the moment, whatever urge comes up, you eat, you reproduce, you sleep, you run around, right? So the human portion of responsibility, it's kind of core to what makes us human, right? What makes us special. Um, and it's kind of such a universal truth, right? But I think there's a lot of confusion around it. There's a lot of different views, and it's very easy for people to kind of not be clear about what is that portion of responsibility, what is responsibility, right? So I think the principal explanation of it is very powerful and very healthy and actually very useful for us to develop our spirituality and our life of faith and our connection with each other and our connection to God. Uh, so I remember, there was a few years ago, those of you have heard of Jordan Peterson, he started to become very famous, right? And one of his core things he was saying was like, clean your room, right? You worry about all these problems in the world, you're trying to save the world, but you should focus on cleaning your room, right? That's your first step. Get your own house in order, and then you'll see very clearly what the next step should be, right? And that's, if you distill that down, that's really that resonated with people. It had such a powerful impact because it's kind of a very clear and simple way of explaining the concept of personal responsibility, right? It's, you know, do something that you can do that is your responsibility, that impacts your life directly. Because personal responsibility can be very hard to accept, right? Because if you look around or if you look at your own life, anything that has caused you suffering or pain or difficulty or even annoyance, right? Um, it's very easy to, find something to justify what happened or to blame someone else or to complain about it. Um, and in many ways, those things could also be true, right? Because there's so many things that are outside of our control. There's so many elements of our lives that we don't control. right? So in a way, it's true that those things are caused by other people or other circumstances, right? It's not that all our suffering is our own fault, right? So there is truth in looking around and being like, this isn't my fault, right? It's not my fault the world is this way. It's not my fault that there's this suffering here or that this person is mistreating me, right? That's actually a true statement, right? Um, and it's also true that if everyone actually fulfilled their responsibility, right, then there wouldn't be suffering in the world, right? Um, there wouldn't be all these situations that are hurting people and causing pain and causing suffering. So in a way, it is their fault, right? It is their fault for not fulfilling their responsibility. Um, but it's also in a way out of our control. We can't change everyone at once, right? And so what can we do? And that really becomes the question of the religious lifestyle, right? The practice of fulfilling your portion of responsibility is kind of distilled down to what can I do, right? That's kind of the way I think of it. That's the way I try to digest and reflect on the things that go on in the world is what can I do? Um, and then that kind of severely limits the things I can worry about, right? Because I can only do what I can do. And so those are the things I can focus on. Those are the things I should focus on. Now, of course, with mother in the detention center, it's very frustrating, right? Because it's like this is it is outside of our control in many ways. We don't live in Korea. We don't vote in their elections, right? We don't have the power and the influence to change the minds of people that could have an impact, right? So it's a very good example. It's part of the reason I've been like reflecting on this a lot. Like, what can I do? Right? You feel very helpless sometimes in the face of the way the world is, right? It's also true on a broader, like, geopolitical scale, right? There's wars going on, there's suffering, there's crazy amounts of, maybe there's crime and abuse. So what can I do? Um, it's a very difficult question, actually. And this is why the personal responsibility is um, such a challenge, right? Because you want to be responsible, but then you feel very helpless to do those things or to make a change, right? Um, so, but in a way, all these things can be explained through personal responsibility, right? If you think about even the situation in Korea, you think, oh, if just one person did their responsibility, we wouldn't be in this situation, right? It's one, if the prosecutor just had a little bit more compassion and was a little bit more flexible and understanding, mother could be at home, right? Or, but maybe that prosecutor has pressure from the president because the president appointed him, or maybe there's other people we don't see who has that influence over that prosecutor and is pushing them, or maybe he's really looking at a promotion and he's kind of been promised a promotion if he does. So there's all these other factors. And also even the president and the party, they were elected by people, individual people, each person making a vote, right? So everything that happens in the world, there's a chain of individual responsibility, individual decisions that people make, right? So it's why it's so slow to change the world, right? It's why it's so slow to fix problems because each person has their own portion of responsibility. And I think the thing that is really hard to accept sometimes is that portion of responsibility is sacred, right? It's completely impossible to completely take over someone else's portion of responsibility, right? According to the principle, according to the way God designed the world and the way it is. And I think, you know, one way that that's very scary is as a parent, right? Because you for a long time, actually, you are taking over your children's responsibilities, right? Because they can't do them. They need the help. So, you're responsible to feed them. You're responsible to protect them. You're responsible to teach them, right? But very quickly, they start taking that responsibility away from you, right? They learn to feed themselves, right? They learn to start to have their own opinions, right? And start to make their own decisions. And you get into this point where you're bribing them or threatening them, right? Reward or punishment, right? But in the end, they start to take that responsibility. And parents almost are in a transition period from the day they're born, kind of handing off responsibility to their children. Very slowly, very carefully, very protectively, but it's unavoidable, right? Um, and it happens a lot faster than I think most parents think, right? And again, I think this is the risk that God took when he created people, is that he had to create beings that actually he couldn't control, that he gave up control over people to allow them to become actually separate beings with their own will and their own decisions, right? And I'm scared that what kind of people my kids will become, right? Will they be good? Will they be good people, right? Will they make the right decisions? And um, I know it's very frustrating and even painful to watch your children make decisions that you think will be bad for them, right? Um, and I'm sure I can start to understand a little bit my dad being upset with me for decisions I make, right? Because they were obviously the right decisions. But as I got older and looked back, some of them weren't the right decisions, right? Because you learn through experience, and your parents are trying to teach you that, they're trying to help you with that. But there is a line that can't be crossed, right? And this is what I mean when I say personal responsibility is sacred. It's what makes us capable of being children of God. Is because at the end of the day, even God will not force us to be his children. It's a decision, right? It's a decision each person has to make. Uh, so it's a very, in philosophy, there's this very interesting question because I think this is where people get very confused about the nature of God. And I think the principle is very clear. Does God know the future? Does he already know everything we're going to do? Right? And the philosophical, like logical thinking of this is very clear. If God knows the future and everything we're going to do, then there's no free will because it doesn't matter what we do. It's already kind of predetermined. There's one end result, right? Um, and so for the Christian faith, this is very confusing because they kind of believe in free will, but they also believe God knows everything, and that includes knowing the future and everything that'll happen, which is why a lot of Christians believe the fall was predestined, that Jesus was predestined from even before the fall. There's a Christian theology that teaches that and believes it, right? But I think the answer is very, very clear. And I think the principle tries to explain this a bit in predestination around the two prophecies, and God doesn't know which prophecy will be fulfilled because it's dependent on human portion of responsibility. But really, God can't know the future because it contradicts the portion of responsibility. And I remember one time True Father said, you know, God created people with absolute faith, right? And that confused me the first time I read it. What faith does God need when he's creating people, right? But I realized it's this faith that he would create beings that he doesn't know what they're going to do and how scary and how risky that was, right? For God. He's like, I'm going to create these beings and I don't know what's going to happen. He used his energy and his love to set it up so that he wouldn't know exactly what people would do. And I think that understanding of God's risk when he creates people is very important for us to understand and to help other people understand, because it is why people get confused around portion of responsibility, around predestination, right? And what I find very fascinating is it's also very similar to the belief that a lot of scientists that have around determinism, right? And the basic belief there is that, if everything is a direct result of the moment right before, right? So if all matter is moving and you could map out every exact piece of matter, like let's say every chemical in the brain, every synapse firing, right? Then you would know exactly the next thing that's going to happen, right? If you could have that perfect knowledge. That's why it's similar to the belief of God being all knowing. If you knew everything exactly in this moment, then you would know for sure the next moment, right? So I'm giving this talk because we had a conversation before and we picked this date. And then I was thinking about it, and every thought I had was a very specific chemical reaction, right? Based on previous chemical reactions. And now I'm standing here and I'm saying these words. But this is kind of a direct result of every moment before. I had pizza last night and that affected, things I was, so it's all connected, right? So a lot of scientists also believe in, interestingly, in a kind of predestination, right? There's no free will. Every moment is the exact result of the moment before. But the principle for a portion of responsibility to be true, it's a direct rejection of that belief of determinism or predestination, right? Every moment people have some unique capacity and ability to make decisions, right? To change, to take an action because they believe something, right? Um, and so this is only possible with kind of the idea of spirit or soul or a spirit world, right? Something outside this direct chain of cause and result, right? Because that's the idea of determinism. Everything is a direct chain of cause and result. Um, so I think, there's a lot of confusion, but it's really important for people to understand the sacredness of our personal responsibility, how critical it is for everything we do. The other thing I think that creates some confusion is also the obvious, I don't want to call them exceptions because I don't believe they're exceptions, but obviously there are people that are actually genuinely dependent, right? They always need help or they'll always need help, right? I'm thinking specifically of people with very specific special needs, like my niece, or, everyone will know someone in their family or extended family or in their friend group. So there is obviously times where people do need um, their portion of responsibility, let's say, transfers to the person that is able to take care of it, right? And so I think this is actually a part of our portion of responsibility. This is the way I would describe it, is taking care of other people, right? So I gave the example earlier of parents. That's a very obvious example. When you're a parent, you are part of your portion of responsibility is to help another person fulfill their portion of responsibility, help them learn, help them feel loved, help them grow, right? Each child is really, honestly, a reflection of the family environment they grew in, right? The good, the bad, right? It's kind of unavoidable, right? And you just hope your kids inherit more of the good than the bad, right? But then they're also heavily influenced by their peer groups, right? Where they go to school, the friends they make. So there's very clearly an overlap in our portions of responsibilities, right? Our portion of responsibility isn't every person is their own little island trying to become, a perfect organism or, a perfect tree or something, right? It's not like seeds planted around and each one is independently growing, but it's an ecosystem of how we interact and relate with each other, right? So we do actually influence and impact each other's portion of responsibility, right? Um, so where is the line, right? Where is the line where we can't anymore take over another person's portion of responsibility? I think that's a very good question. It's something I think about a lot because it's very difficult. the parent example is a good one, but it applies to friends. It applies to people, that we know, even for a short time. When we're trying to help someone and they won't accept the help, or we're trying to help someone and we see that they're making what we think is the wrong decision, right? That we really, we're sure that we're absolutely sure it's the wrong decision and we know it's going to hurt them, but they won't listen or they won't accept it, right? Or they feel like, well, I have to do this on my own. Um, there is a line there, right? And I think in the kind of outside world, it's called boundaries is a good word, right? There's boundaries for how much you can help someone or how much you can let another person affect your emotional state and your abilities. But really, like we're taught this view of living for the sake of others, right? And it is a part of our portion of responsibility to help other people, to care for other people. There will always be people that in society that really need actually constant care, and it becomes a big burden for the caretaker. So if all of society can help that person, it releases the burden a bit. And we see that in modern societies. There's kind of government assistance, that's kind of like a group effort to help lift up people that are in difficult situations, right? So the little bit of that compassion can spread around, make it a little bit easier. But there is a line somewhere. And I think that's, when we say that the portion of responsibility is sacred, we really have to understand where that line is. Because even people that are fully dependent, there are still some things they can do. And it's very important that they learn to do those things to the best of their ability, right? Um, because if you do even those things for them, actually, the situation becomes even worse, right? So it's very important that everyone, whatever level there are, there's always at least a little bit of responsibility they can take, a little bit of portion of responsibility. And that portion of responsibility has to be given to them to fulfill, right? Because that's how they can kind of get to the best possible place in their life, right? So, um, so yeah, I think it's really in our lives of faith as we're trying to become heavenly people and people of trying to become God's children, trying to become people who actually can make a real difference in the world. This becomes a very critical point. I was going to mention communism because communism takes this idea of dependence to the extreme, where everyone's a dependent, everyone needs help, right? Again, it's almost the opposite of the view of personal responsibility, right? Oh, the government should take care of everybody. Right? It's kind of the extreme view that's anti personal responsibility, right? And then you have the other extreme view where everyone should only be responsible for themselves, right? And that's very selfish, and it means the dependents just get left alone to die, essentially, right? But no one wants to say that because it sounds heartless. But that's kind of the end result of that kind of thinking. So obviously there is included in our portion of responsibility is an element of caring for other people and taking care of each other because we influence each other. We're all kind of connected. We all learn from each other, right? But there is a line, and we have to respect it, and we have to understand it, right? Uh, and even there's a limit to our capacity to help other people, right? How much of other people's suffering can we actually take on before we're hurting ourselves, right? That's where the boundary concept comes in, right? So the last point I wanted to make on this, and again, this is kind of, I see it as kind of a constant effort, right? When we talk about why there's a religious lifestyle is because we're still learning, right? The idea of religion, we shouldn't need religion, right? We say that a lot, right? There should be no religion. Religion is like medicine. You only have to take it because you're sick. But ideally, we're all healthy, loving children of God that don't need religion because the things we need, we get directly from God and we get directly from each other, right? But I'm not getting that. Maybe some of you are. I'm not there yet, right? I definitely need some help, right? I definitely am still trying to figure things out. and learn things, right? So I think um, this point really kind of helps give me clarity and direction, personal responsibility. I really want to help people. And so, I'll sit down, I'll talk with them, share with them, but I can't tell them what to do, or I can't expect them to do what I ask them to do. That then becomes their responsibility. And maybe what I said is useful for them. Maybe it's something they needed to hear and it will help them. Or maybe it's the opposite, right? Maybe it only makes them more confused and more struggle more. But um, again, that's their responsibility. If I'm not helpful for them, they got to stop talking to me, right? But I'm trying to be helpful. I'm doing what I think is right, and I'm trying to share that with them. So the last point, which is the most complex, I think, in this understanding of personal responsibility, is people who actively try to take away other people's portion of responsibility. People who are violent or abusive, right? And that's the hardest question for me to answer, right? When you have a government that will put an innocent person in prison or detention because it's not prison, but at a point where it could kill them, right? It's really, and that's just a small example of the kind of crazy stuff that people do to other people, right? There's wars, right? And then again, war is it's not some ambiguous, like invisible government doing war. It's individual people deciding that this is what they have to do. They have to get into a plane and attack another area and drop and shoot at it and drop bombs. It's a series of individual decisions. Um, and so there's people who hurt children, there's all these terrible, it's what I call the underbelly of the fall, right? That is only an underbelly because we've been so lucky, because we've kind of come to this world where we've learned these lessons very slowly and very painfully. So, but in a lot of places in the world, it's not the underbelly. It's the face. It's there every day, staring them in the face. So the last point I think about when I think about personal responsibility is we have to find a way to be strong as possible, right? And strong, I mean emotionally strong, even physically strong, right? Um, I worry, if I ever got attacked, you know, I don't think I try to defend myself, but I don't have high chances. But in a way, that's almost okay. But if someone attacked my kids or my wife, right, then could I defend them, right? Right now, no. And it's one of the things an area I feel I have to be stronger. But that's just a small example. The point is we're very lucky because the chances of that happening here are very low, right? But it's not zero, right? It happens in Ireland, right? People get attacked, people get mugged, houses get broken into. So there is an element of we need to be strong to protect people's portion of responsibility, right? To protect ourselves, protect our families, but we also have to be strong emotionally. So it's not just physically strong, right? But we have to be able to handle difficult emotional situations, different kinds of trauma. So this is one key element of this personal portion of responsibility is eventually we have to get to a place. And this is going to take time. I'm not expecting it to be, in the next 500 years, but we have to be able to solve each tricky problem in the world, right? Each individual situation, if there's a way to have a positive influence, if there's a way to shift and help someone fulfill their portion of responsibility to the amount that we're allowed to, then we have to do it, right? We have to be able to fix each of these tragedies in the world, right? And whenever there's people that need to be taken care of, we need to be able to take care of them. So this requires an incredible amount of strength, right? So that's actually one thing that always motivates me, right? Is I can't be complacent. I can't get stuck in an idea of that's okay or, you know, I have to be stronger. I have to get better, right? I have to be able to handle more things, right? Because that's the only thing I can do, right? That's my responsibility. is to kind of get to the highest, strongest level I can get to. Um, so, so yeah, that's just, sometimes it's very, very frustrating to think about personal responsibility because it comes down to what can I do? Like all these problems are happening. And the answer is always, well, I can only do working on myself, right? It kind of always comes back to, okay, well, then the only thing I can do is try to be a better person, right? And try to be more clear about if there's practical things I can do, I should do them. If there's not practical things I can do, then I need to work on myself, right? And sometimes that feels like it's just not enough, right? It can be overwhelming, right? And then even then, I have to like remember that that's not my personal portion of responsibility. That's other people's personal portions of responsibility. All I can do is try to influence it from here, right? To the extent I can. So that's the struggle. That's the kind of lifestyle that I believe we're all trying to live according to. It's again, it's the thing that I think the clarity and the principle about the individual responsibility is something that I really, really love and I feel is really powerful. And a lot of people are so confused about it. Um, so I think one thing we can do is really just be always very clear, right? That each person has a portion of responsibility. Each person can make small changes on themselves so that they're able to help others more, and that we can influence others to help them fulfill their own portion of responsibility. And I just think that fact, to me, it's very much a fact, um, just makes my personal life so much better, right? The sacredness of personal responsibility. And it helps me kind of frame the way the world is and, adjust to it and accept it and understand it a lot better. So that's what I wanted to share today. That's kind of what's been weighing on my heart and mind, and I wanted to share with brothers and sisters. And I hope it's helpful. I hope it helps you in your daily challenges and um, daily struggles. And I will close with a prayer. Thank you, everybody.